The following program is brought to you by the Intergalactic Educational Audio Network.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new episode of And So the Mind Reels podcast. I am your host, Lee Mueller, and I have been absent for a while, but I have a good excuse. No, I don't have a note from my mom, but what I do have is evidence of my absence. You see, hosting a podcast that talks about creativity, sometimes you have to be that creative person. In other words, you have to actually do what you're talking about and what you preach to other people. Sometimes you have to put down the mic, get off Facebook, get off Twitter, get off Instagram, and actually be that creative person and do something creative. So that's what I did. For the past 2 years or more, I've been steadily working on some stories, just writing straight narrative things. I know I'm known as a playwright and writing murder mystery comedies, but I used to be a story writer. Even when I was a kid, I'd write stories, and in high school I wrote stories, and I worked for the school newspaper and got through college writing stories and writing things, and actually wrote stories and interviews for a publication in St. Louis. So I had a writing background. Before I was a playwright, I was a writer. And during this last couple of years, since it's been we've just had a lot of time to do stuff. We had to stay inside and be safe. So I stayed inside. And while I was safe, I thought, hey, I kind of want to write again. I kind of want to do what I used to do. So that's what I did. I just wrote a bunch of stories and I put them all together eventually in the past couple of months, and I put them together and I put them out there in a book form. It's called Idolescence, Tales of Marvin, a collection of short stories that's available on Amazon and most major book retailers. I didn't really want this to be a plug, but there was the plug. That's all I'm gonna do for now. If you want to look it up, you can find it. Look for my name, look for that title. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the process, because I came about doing these stories in a kind of a unique way. I kind of had a motivation that was kind of not usual. I wasn't inspired one day to write a story. I kind of came to it kind of in a sideways. Well, I'll tell you all about that. And maybe this story of how I did it and the process that I took might inspire you or give you an idea. And who knows, in a year or so, you might have a book out there that you can plug and people can buy, and you'll become famous because I told you how to do it. So let me tell you all about that right after, the intro thing that usually plays right about now. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way, and then I'll come back and I'll tell you how I did it. All right, welcome back. Here comes the process that I took, the long kind of meandering journey to collecting a bunch of short stories. How did you come to write a bunch of short stories? Well, I'll tell you. Since we had all this time off, not from work or anything, we had to stay indoors and kill time. I always had a couple of books in my head. I mean, books that I've wanted to write, but I didn't think it was a really good idea to just jump right in that without kind of taking some baby steps, if you will. I mean, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, right? So one step might be a short story. And then kind of develop your chops and, get the technique down and learn your grammar and your sentence structure that you've probably forgotten since elementary school, and get that all kind of, back in your brain. And then go ahead, and if you want to write a novel later down the road, then fine. Just do the groundwork. So that was kind of the idea that I had in my head. It's like, okay, well, I guess I'll go ahead and I'll try to write just some short stories. But I'm not real familiar. I mean, it's been a while since I've read a short story. There are a lot of them out there. There are a lot of great people that write. There's Chekhov that is famous for short stories. Maybe I should just read. Maybe I should just read for a while first. And so that's what I did. I read some, downloaded some Chekhov on the old Kindle. I heard about a guy named Raymond Carver, who was known as the Chekhov of America, an American writer. I believe he was from Montana, somewhere up in the Northeast, is kind of like his neck of the woods. He went to the Iowa school, writers that all came out of there, Updike and all those guys. He went there, so I thought, okay, well, he's famous for American short stories. Let me go ahead and read his. So I got a couple of books of his and read all of his short stories. And then, of course, there's John Cheever, who was known for short stories. And I got a book of all of his short stories. Hemingway has short stories. Fitzgerald has short stories. I mean, the list goes on and on of short stories that you can read. And what I did is just did that. I just sat down and read a whole lot. I got from that a flavor, a feeling of how the structure is laid out, how you write a short story, what things you can tackle within that, that short story, that it doesn't become a novella, which doesn't become a novel. Getting familiar with that whole framework in which to work in. So there was that. Now, the sideways part, the different part of it, is subject matter. I thought, well, I tried a few things. I wrote a couple little odd short stories based on kind of the things I read, and I thought, it'd be kind of fun is just to take some stories from my life. Let's go back to the old thing that is instilled in every writer: is write what you know. But I really don't subscribe to that. I think that's kind of crap. But so if I were to write what I know, I would take stories from my life, things that happened to me that were kind of funny, because I had little anecdotes and stories that I would tell people. Hey, you know what? When I was a kid, this crazy thing happened to me, and blah, blah, blah. And I would, well, what if I took one of those and just wrote it as a story, kind of like a Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer thing, and wrote a story. Now, parallel to that, on the way to work, I would go in sometimes and I listened to podcasts, and there was this interesting one that had nothing to do with writing, but what it had to do with was therapy. There was a person out there who would take people who had PTSD, pretty severe, and in order for them to face their fears or face their trauma or whatever it is they were dealing with, they had to recognize certain things, and it was really hard to do because their emotions are attached to it, and it would trigger them. So what if we could remove them from the trauma and they could deal with it in a certain way? So what he came up with was having each patient write a story, but not about themselves. Make it in third person. So remove themselves, remove their emotions, remove all feeling toward the thing, write about the trauma, but tell it as if it happened to someone else. So I thought, hey, that would be kind of a cool idea. Not that anything that happened to me was ever traumatic, but what if I removed myself like Mark Twain did in Tom Sawyer? That's, was more or less him as a kid, but he wrote it as if it was this other kid and called him something else. What if I would use that model? That might be unique. That might be interesting to remove myself from myself, looking back on myself. There's a lot of myselfs in there. And maybe I would recognize something or some weird anomaly, psychological, that, that I had that may explain a lot. And just in a harmless way, write about some things that were funny when I was a kid, and do it as a third person. Actually, take it a step further. Make it as if it's a completely different character. Okay, that's a unique idea. Maybe I'll do it as if, let's see, well, when I was a kid, I had the nickname Lee Marvin because my name was Lee, and kids would call me, hey, Lee Marvin, come over here. Because Lee Marvin was an actor and a popular actor at the time, The Dirty Dozen and different things. And my name was Lee. It became Lee Majors later, but I liked Marvin better at this point. So I thought, well, okay, what if the little kid in the story, who is a reflection of myself, is called Marvin? All right, so let's use that name, Marvin. And instead of just doing a straight, memoir type thing about autobiographical, let's just take this thinnest thread of the truth of something that happened to me and then just build around it a bunch of fictional stuff, which is kind of like what most writers do anyway, but they don't tell you. Admit it, but I'm going to admit it and just say these things are things that I remember, but they're done in such ways they're kind of an impression. Okay, if you're familiar with art, Monet, he did water lilies. It's a painting of water lilies. It's not crisp and clean and clear. It's kind of fuzzy. It's kind of hazy. It's kind of an impression of water lilies. Renoir did impressions of things. So what if I wrote in the third person as a different character and did it impressionistic style of writing? So I did one little short story about a funny thing that really happened that I did when I was a kid, which reminded me of another thing that happened to me as a kid. So, okay, so let's do that one. So that one became a little longer because I thought this is what happened to me. But in order for me to get to what happened, I have to tell you this. And before I tell you that, I got to tell you this. And I would kind of write backwards in a way. This is what happened, but how did I get here? So I would start at the end in mind and write to get to the ending. So that was a kind of a weird way to go about it also. And I had to fill in a lot of details. I mean, I would call my mom sometimes and say, hey, you remember that one time, that first day of kindergarten when, I had a meltdown and I ran screaming from the school? Yeah, I remember. So what happened with that? I mean, there were things that I just knew that this happened, but how it happened or how I got there, I just didn't remember. And luckily she didn't remember too much either. So I had to fill it in. I had to make up. I had to use my creative brain to okay, I have to get from A to C. I got to make up B. So I would just make up filler, basically. I mean, not filler as in the term of, it's really just junk that you're filling. No, I had to fill in the details from my imagination because I knew this happened, but I had no idea how I got there. So that led me to other things that I would think about. I thought, this would be a good story, or this would be a good story. And after a while, I had enough of them and I was developing a style. I was kind of getting back to my old style that I used to write on. There he is. There is that old writer I used to recognize that was kind of funny and people enjoyed reading. There he is. So he came back, the old writer within me that had his own unique style. Because up until that point, I was drawing from the people I read, really. The Raymond Carver and the Cheever and the Chekhov and the different people, the different styles that I had read. I kind of approached it as if, well, how would they word this? How would they structure the sentence? How would they describe this or that? And I would just use that until my own style started coming through, my own old take on things and wacky way of wording would come through. And boom, after about, 3 months, he was there. He came back. I know it's weird, me talking about me as if I'm another person, but that's what I'm doing. I'm doing this as a third person. So it makes sense. You can go back and listen. It'll make sense to you. So that was the style I used until I found my style, and it just kind of took off. I didn't start out wanting to just write these tales of Marvin. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to just do it until I could, maybe start working on a book over here. And actually I did. I mean, I started getting that rhythm down and that routine down enough that, I would put this story down and I'd go over here and I'd start this thing that I wanted to do, which led me motivation to go over here and start this thing, which I wanted to do. And I was very kind of, I don't know, forgive the term, but ADD so far as creativity, because I didn't have to, I just have to focus on this one thing. And when I get this one thing done, then I can move on. I was never that guy, I'm not that guy now because the work I do in real life requires me to do like 5 things at one time. So it's just within my nature that I can work on 5 different narratives pretty much at one time. I get tired of this one, I can jump over here and pick right up where I was on that one. That's, if you can do it, great, do it. I don't recommend, anyway. So I had enough stories about Marvin, about this character, this impression of myself as a kid, and it was different time frames. It was not anywhere linear, where this has happened when I was 3, and then when I was 4, and then when I was 5. I jumped around. If you're familiar with Slaughterhouse-Five by Vonnegut, the character in that can jump to any point in his life from, childhood to up until the time of his death and relive his death and then jump back to middle age. It was kind of like that. I could jump around. I jumped around to different points in my life, all within the framework of a kid, from about, 5 years old up to about maybe 12 years old. So in that ballpark is the timeline I worked with. But I set them up in kind of order, put them together. Now, here's the thing that I don't think I would try again. When I was a playwright, I had a deadline. I had to turn in a play at this date for them to do the auditions. And if you've listened in the past to some of the things I did with Bob Baker's podcast, I talked about sometimes I didn't have it done. Sometimes they auditioned there was auditions for the play and they were casting actors and I didn't have a complete script. But working on that deadline forces me to come up with something and do it. So that's what I did. You can go on, if you publish through Amazon, you can set up a pre-sale. You can say, I'm going to have this book completed by, July the 4th of 2023. Okay. And they'll hold you to that. So you have to have it in, or else they're going to release whatever you got in there on July 4th, 2023. So I thought, let me go ahead and do that. That'll force me to get this thing done. So I set that up and I had to push it out 3 times and I still wasn't done. There's a whole other story in the Tales of Marvin that wasn't complete by the time the book was published because it just kept getting longer and longer and longer. It was another thing of, I got to tell you this before I tell you that. Oh, I need to tell you about this too. So this will make sense. So I got so lost in trying to finish that story. Lo and behold, my Tales of Marvin got published with one story left out. And people are asking me now that have read it, is there going to be a sequel? We really enjoyed it. Is there going to be a sequel? Well, actually, yeah. I mean, I had this whole other story that I didn't even finish. So, yeah, there's a sequel built in that you don't even know about. But, yes. So, recapping. I wanted to write. I read a bunch of short stories to get myself versed in that format, get myself reacquainted with the medium. Wrote a couple of little short bits just to kind of get my muscles back in there, my brain working. I heard about a way to approach a subject using third person based on your life, where you could look at your life outside of it and detach yourself. And that's the format I used for this, being a third person and not being a memoir and autobiography. It's just an impression. And I kind of did the Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer bit and put it all together into a book. It got published. I won't say unbeknownst to me. I knew it was coming, but I just couldn't get that last story in time. But hey, I had enough. I had 60 pages of stuff anyway. So boom, There's a volume 1 out there now. Adolescence, Tales of Marvin, a collection of short stories available on Amazon. But that's the book. That's kind of the process I took. So it was kind of a more or less a helter-skelter approach that I wanted to do this. My intention at the very beginning was not to publish a book of short stories based on funny things that happened to me. It was just to get the writing, short narrative, non-play, non-theatrical part of myself back. And I got it back. It came back. It was like riding a bike, really. If you're familiar with doing something and you put it away for a while, it's kind of nice to bring it back out, dust it off, and go, oh yeah, I remember this. I can do this. So that was the method that I took. Was I was aiming here and I ended up over here, which is brilliant, which is fine, because you could be aiming for one thing and end up something completely better than you started out wanting to do. But I still have the books inside my head that I'm still working on right now. Probably another whole podcast would be, well, you're known primarily for this. Do you think it's safe to try to go over here and do this? I mean, you're an arc welder. You weld things together. Do you really want to do underwater pottery right now? That's a completely different medium. We'll save that for another time. But if anything that I talked about in here inspired you or thought, well, that's kind of interesting, I might try that, please go ahead, do it. Sit down now, or when you're done eating or whatever you're doing, try it. Try recapturing something and putting it on paper, or if you're inspired to paint something from memory, doing an impression. And the only things I would say is go ahead and get familiar with the medium. Go ahead and read some stuff, look at some stuff, watch some films, get inspired. Go ahead and just put it down and see what comes out. See what happens. See if you have a collection within you that you can put out there. And I'll look for it. Let me know where I can get it, and I'll get it. And until next time, the mind reels.